Hey everyone, I'm Tim the Suburban Dad, and I'm here with a good buddy of mine, Eric,
Hey guys.
who has been an OG whiskey enthusiast, at least compared to me. I'm relatively new with the popular wave. Eric tried to get me into whiskey about 10, 12 years ago now in grad school, and I didn't take the bait back then, but now looking back, I really wish I could. Today, we want to discuss the progression of bourbon from where it was back when he started getting into it versus when I started getting into it versus now, because it's been quite the evolution over time, and some of the things he talks about will blow your mind in terms of pricing and availability. So, what year was it that you kind of really got into bourbon or whiskey?
Yeah, I guess it was really close to 2010, 2009.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yep, quite a bit ago. And what was your favorite back then?
Back then, somehow as it is now, Eagle Rare.
Hard to go wrong with Eagle Rare. And of course, nowadays it's easily around $50 on the at retail, just about. I've seen it as high as $90 or $100.
Mm.
What was? Do you remember what it was back in your day?
It was $23.99. Whenever I liked it, yeah.
That's an easy all-day buy. Absolutely. So back then, Eagle Rare was. I mean, you could just walk in and buy it, right?
Yeah, it was on the shelf. There were a couple of stores that it was on the bottom shelf that I would go to, but there were a few places where it usually hangs out in the middle shelf. And I mean, really, I looked at it. I said, okay, that's a cool looking bottle. I like Eagles. And used to always have the 10 stamped across the top. So I said, well, age statement seems to be good. And I had a lot of friends who liked different kinds of beverages, and they would talk about age statements. So I said, why not? So I got it, had it. I said, this tastes a lot different from mellow corn and other things that I've had. I can drink it again. And I did.
And what else was on the shelf back then that would blow people's minds?
Well, Blanton's was hanging out all over the place. There was a store that I went into pretty frequently around the area, and they had a barrel, and they were trying to display it to get more people to buy it. And nobody would buy. I walked right past it, barrels of it, and it was $29, $29.99, $34.99, something like that, for the longest time. And I was like, oh, that's so expensive.
Easily
I
half.
can get this for $23.99.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wild.
I've got a friend who, he's a bit older than I am, but he couldn't believe that they started selling whiskey for $50 or more. And he had brought in for a show and tell with some friends. He bought an entire shelf of Pappy Van Winkle, everything that they had, because he couldn't believe that whiskey was getting up to $50 a bottle. And he thought it might be worth something someday. So he had close to 100 bottles of that in his basement. Yeah.
Whoa! That is a great investment right there. That's almost a retirement fund, pretty much. Holy crap. Not really, but close, So as you were getting more into the whiskey world and you started paying attention to pricing, obviously back then prices were amazing compared to what we're used to now. But what did you notice as you started to investigate bourbon and whiskey more in terms of prices?
Well, started noticing from very early on, and I assume that many people watching will have noticed that price doesn't always indicate how good something is. Oftentimes it is just a price, and sure, as a general trend, things can go up with quality, but there are many things that could be purchased that did not have to cost a lot, and that really piqued my interest at first. I was young in practice and wanted to make sure that I was getting something that we could enjoy. And very often in my early journals on different things that I was tasting, I actually included price in the taste of things. Because if it costs way too much, I'm not going to enjoy it as much. So I had a lot of fun exploring a few different options. I took a bartending class and learned how to mix a few things, and that was fun. And I said, for some reason, some of these cocktails taste better with this kind of bourbon over this kind of bourbon. Why is that? And that kind of spurred me to start looking into things a little bit deeper.
And so I got into whiskey around, it was actually, I remember distinctly, January of 2020, we were out to dinner. And so between when you started, which is about 5, 8 years before then, was there a noticeable price change even just during that amount of time?
Oh yeah, really drastic. We were in school, and I would start going, and I remember even this bottle here went up from 23-ish, 24-ish dollars up to $30 in 2 years. And I remember talking to the store, like, did it burn down? No, they're still making tons of it. Well, why is it so much more expensive? How in the world are you charging this? And he's like, that's how much it costs. It's getting more popular, and you're not the only person who likes it.
Yeah.
And then it just went crazy from there. And at this point in time, some of the things that I enjoy drinking, I'm almost priced out of, because
hear you.
There's so many things coming out where it's like, well, this is good enough. I'll just get this instead.
Yes. And so a question I've been wanting to ask, dialogue with someone about for a long time, you're as good as any, is the idea of a whiskey company, a distillery. Should they focus more on a reliable, dependable, tried and true go-to product that you know and love, or should they focus more on innovative, new techniques, new finishes, new barrel wood, all that kind of stuff, or a mix of both? Because nowadays that has been a huge trend. I know you are not in the loop as much anymore because you've amassed a great collection, but what would you say just off the bat?
I would argue that, especially for the sake of telling your friend, hey, I really like this. You live X number of hours away. If you go to your store, you could buy this. And the odds are you're going to be drinking a really similar thing that I'm drinking that I like. Whenever we start talking about experimental bottles, you're not going to find it. It's fun, but your friend is not going to buy the same thing that you're telling them to buy, because it's something different. It's not a normal or a stable expression. So they end up buying it, and you probably don't even like it. And now they're confused. You gave an odd referral, but I am definitely an advocate for having, this is what we like coming out with as a base expression. We can move on from here, but this is our tried and true, solid workhorse. It's something that you can rely on. And indeed, this is what a lot of people back in the old days really enjoyed. If they saw 16 bottles and they were 16 different shades, they usually weren't buying it because they didn't believe it was going to taste the same. And that's why we start getting into adding coloring and things of that nature. Sure. Anything to make it seem more stable. We're way beyond that now. We finally have expressions that are similar, batch after batch after batch, so let's try something exciting.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, whenever I'm drinking with a friend, we come from a time where the internet was exploding. We come from a time where you had access to a very vast amount of information, and it made it difficult to feel special or unique. Some way that this can translate in the spirit world is whenever you have a unique expression of something. Hey, I really like this one-off bottle that I got at the distillery. It makes them feel special. It's something that's yours. Well, yeah, you had that, but I have this store pick. I have this expression where I spoke with the master distiller and he said he made 50 of these bottles and I got one of them. And all of a sudden, they're bringing you into that circle and you feel special, more unique. It's something that they can grasp onto, and now you've got more brand loyalty, and you have people who are now seeking these options. And I believe that's where some of this kind of blew up.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, there's finished whiskeys, there's new wood. I mean, everything you can imagine, everything that I can imagine to be finished in, it has. Honey, maple, brandies, wine, sherry,
Pecan.
You name it. Yeah. I mean, rum, all of it. And now they're trying new wood with Mizunara, with Amburana, with, pecan, hickory, you name it, all kinds of stuff there. And so I think that really nails it, talking about feeling special, because why else would you need anything other than what you love? Well, because it's something exciting, new, special. And what are so many companies doing nowadays? Special releases, limited editions. A great example is Maker's Mark. Back in the day, they only had regular Makers, they had Maker's Cask Strength, and they had Maker's 46. And that was it. And then they got Maker's Mark 46 cask strength. They started the wood finishing series. They've got private selections of single barrels. They've got the 101. They've got the cellar aged. I mean, it's exploded. And a lot of that is great whiskey. But again, try this single barrel. I can't. I live 300 miles away. You've got companies like Redline and Starlight that are finishing. They're like the kings of finishing bourbon. I don't even know if they have a quote unquote go-to or standard. Of course, Redline is sourced for all of their whiskey. Starlight does their own distilling, but it's all finished based. Like that is their niche. So the other thing to keep in mind with that is a company that's focused more on the innovative side and the exploratory. It's cool, but let's say they have a couple bad releases, maybe even back to back, and all of a sudden this fan base that they built up, all of a sudden they're not so interesting anymore, because why would you want to keep buying crappy whiskey that you didn't like? Yeah, you got a couple cool bottles before, but it becomes too risky at some point.
Makes me think of a restaurant, right? You start gaining a lot of clout. Most restaurants, if you can think of your favorite restaurant or maybe the fanciest restaurant you've ever been to, the chef there is usually what you're going for. They're making something new, but you should typically see items on the menu that were their heavy hitters that are now there to stay. They figure out that you do have to honor, for the people who really enjoyed their experience, you should probably have something that when they go back, sure, maybe I'll try something new, but I'm going to go for that thing that I really remember getting. The restaurant last week, and our waitress was saying, people come for the view, but they come back for this cookie dish that they made. Mm-hmm. It was delicious, but I like the way that she said that. I think one of the reasons why this is still always on my shelf is I would still argue for the money, it's a relatively good buy. I just really enjoy it. And if you get a good pick of this, let's say you've got somebody, not a whole lot of people know this, but whenever you get a store pick of something, sometimes the representative from the store doesn't even go.
Right.
But you get a store pick, and you'll get some people who are like, store pick, and they're going to get that thinking it's much better. But in reality, those barrels are blended together for a neutral and base workhorse expression.
Yes.
Well, that means some of those barrels are a little worse.
A little off. Right.
So if the guy goes, I'll just click and buy a single barrel, and then we'll say this is our store pick, well, you might actually be getting one. And I used to have a taste testing like that. I had 6 different store picks. Some of them were quite good, focusing on a couple of flavors that I really enjoy that come out of a few things. And some of them tasted like dirty cinnamon bark, which still, as an expression in general, is not so bad. They're hanging out on the bottom 2 levels of the same rickhouse that Buffalo Trace comes out of, but very noticeable differences.
Yeah.
So
that's the gamble with single barrel. It could be amazing, could be less than great.
Yeah.
Now, it's specifically comparing a big company like Jim Beam, Makers, you name it, and a craft distillery. Same question there about innovative versus reliable. Any difference with the size of the distillery? Does that change anything for you?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to go visit Still 630 is St. Louis near the river, and a lot of people in whiskey. For the longest time, the thing that made you unique is the water. They would talk about their water. The limestone water, this part of the river has particular sediment bodies and things like that. You'll see this, it's almost everywhere. Whenever you look at, especially, pre-1960s, they're talking about their water supply. And then you get some people coming out, well, I just need some water. And you've got the companies like Still 630, David Welgar's, is practicing or, is distilling out of an old restaurant building, a fast food restaurant, and he is using the St. Louis tap water, and all of a sudden is winning all of these awards for craft distillery and great expressions, and they're asking him these questions, and certainly this must be great, it must be your water, and that's challenging to hear, right? How does this taste so good?
Right.
And
I don't even drink the tap water.
Yeah, me neither. So it's amazing that if you use it in a particular way, and I think that might be an important thing that we talk about, maybe it's more than just the type of water you're using. Sure, maybe it would taste different or in a way that was desirable if a different type of water was used, but maybe the person making it or just the right number of things happening at the right time, it's fresh and it keeps something fun.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That is a good point about the water, because you hear so many companies, typically in the past, it's been talked about more like, oh, it's our water from the Ohio River, right? Buffalo Trace, right on the Ohio River. And it's got certain minerality to it. And yeah, that will change the outcome of the whiskey compared to St. Louis tap water. But that one thing is not the end all be all. I would say with larger companies, they're a little bit safer to do both, to have some standard expressions as well as delve into the experimental side, because then if they're already popular, they can keep their fan base and they can hook new people with, hey, what about this fancy eye-catching new bottle that's limited, and you want to be cool, right? So go ahead and buy this. Now, the thing with craft distilleries, I feel like in general, they tend to be more unique in some of the processes that they do. Like they'll tend to use different equipment, like pot still or a custom column still, that kind of thing, versus just the industrial size equipment. And that will lead to differences. I mean, like you kind of touched on, you can't predict the grain quality or characteristics 100%. You can't guarantee the wood in the barrels, even though it's American white oak. There's going to be variations depending on where those oak trees came from and what kind of weather happened, what kind of soil, all that stuff. So truly, I think it's a combination of all the variables, but having a truly master distiller who can bring all that together is what's going to dictate if it's great whiskey or not, versus just, oh yeah, we checked all the boxes, so this must come out as good whiskey.
It's got to be good. There it is.
It's got to be good. And if not, we'll finish it in sherry casks.
But we do see that, right? Everybody's opening up a distillery. So how many things have you tried? This was true back then, and I assume it's true now. There are probably a ton of things hitting the shelf, and people are relatively excited about it. Yeah. And you go to open it, and it's not exciting at all.
Right.
Because it is just, they said, well, I just need, right, the country song, I need corn and water, and I need maybe a little bit of malted barley, and that should give me something good, and it's just not the way it works.
Right. Well, especially nowadays with the market, in my opinion, being saturated. Something that's, too young, they're trying to get their name and product out there. I have much higher appreciation for companies putting out their own distillate compared to just sourced whiskey. This is kind of a conundrum in my brain, because sourced whiskey is delicious. Ross and Squibb, formerly MGP, makes amazing whiskey. They're pros. No wonder everybody sources from them, because they're amazing. They make really good stuff. But if all you're doing is taking that and putting it in a bottle, or maybe you're finishing it a little bit in some other cask, that's not great to me. Like, I don't appreciate that level of effort very much. Versus, hey, we sourced for a little bit just to get going, but we distilled our own stuff right away, and now we can actually put out our own product. We came up with the mash bill. We decided how we wanted to do it, and we did everything ourselves. That is really impressive. I love to support more companies that do that. Like Old Dominic is one. They had sourced for a while at first. I get it. That stuff was delicious. And now their own stuff that they're putting out is delicious. So they truly are a great company, because they were good to start with, and even their own stuff from scratch is amazing too.
Yeah, you shared that with me recently, and I was very surprised. Not only an attractive bottle, but very delicious and easy to drink.
Yes. Yeah.
A company that comes to my mind was High West. Whenever they started out, they were sourcing pretty heavily. And again, it's this idea of maybe what it looks like before a car is made. They'll come out with a clay model, and they'll have drawings, and it all looks like it could be a great thing. But until artists and artisans come together and actually build it, do you actually get the magic of what it is there?
Yeah, the magic. That's a good point.
So you see the master distillers come in and they say, well, this is what our expression is going to be. we want to keep everybody happy, but we need to start coming out with product. Okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to get, this is probably what we're going to do. So I'm going to get this from MGP and I'm going to put it in a way that works for us, that we like, and they start selling it. And I remember it being a very exciting time whenever they started coming out with their own things. Mm-hmm. And people were excited because it was no longer just the pieces, parts that were just placed together, but actually their true expression. And it's still fun to get one of those bottles out from time to time and say, okay, this is whenever they were sourcing, and this is now some more whenever they're doing their own thing. It's quite fun.
Yeah. And this isn't to say that sourced or finished whiskey is not good, because I've had a lot of finished whiskey that I've enjoyed, not Amberana. Whose idea was that? Just, that person needs to be banished from the bourbon world. Gross. And I'm totally done with sherry cask finishes. Those are overdone. We don't need any more of that.
Send those to me.
Sure, send it to Eric. I'll give you his address in the comments below. So there can be some really cool stuff. Again, great whiskey, but it just seems very trendy and it's hyped up. I don't see that being an ongoing trend, because eventually they're gonna pull a Jurassic Park, and just because they could doesn't mean they should. And they're going to start, do we really need to finish whiskey and all this stuff? I'd say no. I think it's cheapening the bourbon experience as a whole. Like, you can mask some pretty awful whiskey with a finish. Like, okay, maybe you're saving that whiskey, but it's perpetuating low-level effort and quality. I guess that'd be my biggest argument against further finishing, specifically finishing, not all innovation, but finishing. It seems like low-hanging fruit that you're targeting more entry-level whiskey drinkers. And again, it's easy to get burned because those bottles aren't cheap. It's not like they're $30 bottles. They're all $50 plus for any finished stuff. So it's not like, oh, here's this cheap, easy-to-find bottle that's reliable. No, it's going to be different all the time, different company to company. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of that.
Yeah. I also like having base expressions because then I get to do what I want with it. So I prefer to go online or a forum and see how somebody took this, which I know I can get, which I know I can have, and I enjoy already, and I can expect to get a certain thing out of a particular bottle whenever I buy it. And then I can read this recipe and say, okay, this person took peaches and they infused it in a certain way over a certain amount of time, and now I can make my own thing.
There you go.
I would encourage you to do your background checks on these, especially flavored and infused, and usually it's flavored with things that we can't pronounce, usually, and it tastes a particular way, and now you can't really use it for anything else. I get it. Some things are great for, I only ever use it for this one drink anyways. Mm-hmm. Well, why not make it yourself? It's cheaper to do it that way anyways, and you know you're getting a great base product.
Yeah.
Nothing is being pulled over your eyes because it tastes a certain way. I like to say, nobody actually craves the taste of a McDonald's cheeseburger, right? But I like the chefs.
My comments are going to blow up about
are not
that,
doing,
sure.
But they're scientists are excellent because the chemical reaction that happens in your brain when you eat one makes you addicted to that flavor of chemicals in your brain. So usually I've got to go every now and then because I've got to have that flavor because it's been lodged in my brain. I don't crave a cheap cheeseburger, but what I do crave is that sensation that it gives. So take that for what you will.
So in the comments, let me know, what do you think of finished, specifically finished? Because again, there's a lot of innovations happening, a lot of which I think is cool, but the finished bottles in particular, what do you think of those? And let me know how long you've been into bourbon, because I'm curious if you're newer, if you have a different opinion versus if you've been into it longer. So curious. We're going to do science in the comments, folks. So let me know that. And make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you very much to Eric for being here today. It's always a pleasure. And with that, everybody, until next time, cheers.